2001, 47 years after the release of the book, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring released to critical and audience acclaim. It was the second highest grossing film of 2001, beaten only by Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. It won the Academy Awards for Best Cinematography, Best Makeup, Best Original Score, and Best Visual Effects, having been nominated for 13 overall. The movies were so popular that they spawned a prequel trilogy based on The Hobbit that premiered from 2012 to 2014. While many aspects of The Lord of the Rings have become interwoven into the popular mythos, to the point where it's often difficult to tell where Tolkien ends and folklore begins, I want to focus on the elves. The contemporary view of elves is exceedingly Tolkien-esque. Tall, magical beings with pointed ears who are frequently archers. But Tolkien drew a lot of his inspiration from Elizabethan, Victorian, and other traditional fairy tales. In fact, many sources in folklore often use the terms elf and fairy interchangeably, with the most notable difference usually being that elves were often considered male and fairies female. In his earlier poems and in the Book of Lost Tales, Tolkien even used the words fairies and fae. Among the reasons why he switched to elf were the associations of fairies with playfulness and prettiness, and the Old English origins of the word elf versus the Old French fairy. This fusion of lore will be important later. The young adult genre is the classification, popularized in the 1970s and 1980s, of books written for readers between the ages of 12 and 18. It often explores themes relevant to young adults, such as coming of age, sexuality, developing one's identity, and familial conflict, but there is no limit to what the genre covers. This definition is still incredibly blurred, however, as many books float between the labels of teen, young adult, new adult, and others. Enter Sarah J. Maas. Born in 1986, Maas began writing her first novel at 16. It was eventually published as Throne of Glass in 2012. This launched her lucrative writing career, which now features 17 books, 3 series, and 1 television series in development. Today we're going to be looking at her second series, A Court of Thorns and Roses, colloquially known as ACOTAR. The first book was published in 2015 and follows 19-year-old Feyre Archeron as she is taken to the fairy land of Prythian. As the series continues, she becomes a fairy herself and fights in a war to defend Prythian and the human lands from the evil king of Hybern. The series, while being extremely popular, has also been heavily criticized for its portrayal of abuse, sexual assault, and its lack of diversity. Despite superficial differences, the fairies of ACOTAR, more specifically the High Fae, are simply the elves of the Lord of the Rings reworked for a modern audience. ACOTAR does have its own version of more conventional fairy myths, such as wraiths and river wraiths. But the High Fae, the race that the overwhelming majority of the main characters are less connected to those same myths. They can tell lies, and they are not affected by iron. They share similar traits with the elves of the Lord of the Rings. Their ears are pointed, a feature that was developed in the Peter Jackson movies. And they're immortal, they have increased senses, and they have vaguely defined elemental magic. This elemental magic can be seen in The Lord of the Rings when Elrond uses a flood of water to save Frodo from the ring wraiths, and in the connection Galadriel has with the orchards of Lothlorien. The fairies of A Court of Thorns and Roses also live in courts, more defined than the realms of elves in The Lord of the Rings, and are ruled by monarchical high lords. Throughout the Peter Jackson adaptation of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Legolas experiences a massive increase in power level and screen time. During the Battle of Helm's Deep in the book The Two Towers, Gimli and Legolas are evenly matched, with Gimli passing Legolas' number of orcs killed only by 1. By the time both trilogies of movies were created, however, Legolas is riding a shield down a flight of stairs while shooting orcs and then running up falling bricks in slow motion. popularity of Orlando Bloom's depiction of the character was enough not only for a cameo, but an entire subplot involving another movie-only character, the elf Tauriel. Besides the popularity of the novels, besides the popularity of the movies, I think characters like Legolas, and to a certain extent Galadriel, have a part to play in the popularization of Tolkien's elf mythology. See this tweet for emphasis. But why does this matter? Tolkien created an epic body of literature that, through adaptational interpretation, made Orlando Bloom Legolas a sex symbol and trickled down through popular culture to bring us Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses. But we have one more piece of the puzzle. Every single main character in The Lord of the Rings is male. There are a couple of important female side characters that include Galadriel, Arwen, as her role is increased in the movie, and Éowyn. Éowyn is a complicated character. She rides into battle disguised as a man and kills the Witch King. Then, while recovering from this, she realizes that the hole in her heart can only be filled by settling down, giving up all of her ambitions, and becoming a good wife to Faramir. Before the battle, she had pleaded with Aragorn to bring her with him, and yet he told her, "For that I could not grant without leave of the king and of your brother." Éowyn is bound by the conventions of her culture, even more so by the conventions of Tolkien's culture. Even when she breaks through these fetters and accomplishes a deed worthy of renown, the narrative must put her in her rightful place. A Court of Thorns and Roses falls into the same traps that The Lord of the Rings does, even over half a century later. On an initial read, Fëanor might seem to be a rather liberated character. She becomes the first ever High Lady of Prythian, fights in the battle against Hybern, the series version of Mordor, and is given her own agency as a character, especially compared to the lack of agency that characterizes most of Éowyn's role. But the novels are also frequently criticized for their strong patriarchal undertones, namely the mating bond. Now, there are several other cultural pieces that factor into this that I will not get into. Needless to say, the trope of having a soulmate, your one true love, that you are connected to by an unbreakable bond, has taken over the romance genre lately. It is especially found in fantasy, and in the YA new adult niche that A Court of Thorns and Roses fits into. In the novel, all mated couples are heterosexual, and the mating bond is implied to have magically evolved as a way to put together well-matched couples that would have strong children. In A Court of Thorns and Roses, men, or males, as the male fairies are called, are primarily driven to protect their mates, and the idea that a female belongs to her mate is not exactly listed as an archaic belief. Fëanor consistently praises her mate Rhysand for giving her the ability to make her own choices. Her controlling her own life is not apparently a given. It is seen as, and her mate is seen as a progressive hero for allowing her to make her own choices. This patriarchal and strictly monogamous structure has its roots in The Lord of the Rings. Time and time again, we see powerful couples within the elves. Celeborn and Galadriel, Elrond and Celebrian, and Beren and Luthien. Galadriel wields Nenya, one of the 3 elven rings of power, but her power sustains Lothlorien, rather than aids in battle. Although the mating bond of Maas's novels has other roots, one can't deny that it would fit well in the world that Tolkien has created. On September 1st, 2022, the first 2 episodes of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, premiered on Amazon Prime Video. It takes its inspiration loosely from the novels and appendices of The Lord of the Rings. The first season alone has cost Amazon almost $500 million, and the budget is predicted to pass $1 billion, making it the most expensive television show ever produced. While I don't think it is possible for even the passage of time to remove Tolkien's influence on popular culture, it's clearly not happening anytime soon. And Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorns and Roses series, while also being produced for a TV adaptation, is nowhere near this level of notoriety. It hasn't even reached the level of YA hits such as Twilight and The Hunger Games, although its popularity on communities like Book Talk on TikTok cannot be understated. It's really easy to criticize Maas and the world she's created. And the first 3 search results for the series on YouTube are highly critical reviews. But these reviews are there for a reason. Love it or hate it, A Court of Thorns and Roses is a New York Times bestselling series. But this is not a Maas problem. Yes, the mating bond and Rhysand's faux feminism and Feyre's transformation from powerful protagonist in Book 1 to pregnant side character in Book 4 are all things we can and should discuss. But in reality, this is a Tolkien problem, and moreover, it's an us problem. When we hold The Lord of the Rings to such a high standard, and when we become so enmeshed in his ideas that we can't tell Tolkien from our own cultural history, we are letting the outdated and negative aspects of his work, such as the patriarchal and racist messaging, to be carried along with all the amazing and wonderful parts of The Lord of the Rings. I read The Lord of the Rings when I was in 7th grade, and I was only 13. And A Court of Thorns and Roses, although the series has increasingly explicit sexual content, it's frequently put on young adult shelves, a genre targeting audiences as young as 12. As a college student, I can read The Lord of the Rings and think, wow, it would really suck to be a woman in Middle-earth. But also, this is one of the greatest books of all time. I can separate those. But speaking to those my age and older, if we don't say these things out loud, if we don't allow these critiques to fall into the popular narrative as much as the original works do, then we are allowing these negative ideas to influence new generations, as they have been doing since before Tolkien could pick up a pen. We can't control what other people believe, or what they like to read, but we can control our own critical awareness. And it is not only a disservice to ourselves, but to the younger generations around us, to not bring forward critiques, even of the things that we love the most.